My mother wore black cashmere to court. It was a calculated choice, expensive enough to command respect from the jury, soft enough to make her look fragile. She sat on the witness stand holding a crumpled tissue she had not actually used and looked at the 12 men and women in the box. "She hasn't worked a day since college," my mother said. Her voice trembled at the exact right frequency. Her father indulged her, and when he got sick, she took advantage of him. She took everything. I sat at the defense table next to my attorney, Marcus. I did not shake my head. I did not glare. I just watched her. My father, Arthur Hayes, died 11 months ago. He was a quiet man who owned a boutique consulting firm in Alexandria, Virginia. To my mother and to the rest of the neighborhood, he was just a boring analyst who went to work, came home, and occasionally traveled for conferences. To me, he was the man who taught me how to trace offshore shell companies, decrypt banking ledgers, and follow the money that defense contractors tried to hide from the federal government. Officially, my title at his firm was administrative assistant. I made $45,000 a year on paper. Unofficially, I was his lead intelligence analyst. My mother knew none of this. She only knew what she could see. A daughter who lived in a modest apartment, drove a 6-year-old sedan, and supposedly lived off her father's charity. "Mrs. Hayes," her attorney said. Sterling was a man who wore suits that cost more than my car. He stepped toward the podium. "Can you tell the court what happened when you tried to access your late husband's primary trust account 3 weeks after his funeral?" My mother dabbed her dry eyes. "It was gone. The bank manager told me the account had been emptied and closed." "And how much was in that account?" Sterling asked. He turned slightly so the jury could see his manufactured outrage. $4,200,000, she whispered. A low murmur rippled through the gallery. The court reporter's fingers danced across her machine. "And who authorized that withdrawal?" Sterling asked softly. My mother lifted her chin and pointed directly at me. She did, my own daughter. She was stealing from her dead father. Marcus wrote a single word on his legal pad. Predictable. He pushed the pad toward me. I nodded once. My father did not leave me $4 million to buy sports cars or designer clothes. That money was not an inheritance. It was a contingency fund. 6 weeks before the pancreatic cancer finally killed him, he called me into his home office. He handed me a physical ledger and a hardware encryption key. He told me that his final audit had uncovered a structural embezzlement ring operating within a federal defense contract. He knew the people involved were watching him. He knew they would watch his accounts after he died. "Drain the primary trust the day after the funeral," he had told me. His voice was barely a rasp. "Move it to the blind account in Delaware. If your mother gets her hands on it, she will spend it, draw attention, and they will come after her. If the firm's partners find it, they will bury the evidence. I keep it hidden until the Inspector General finishes the parallel investigation." I did exactly what he asked. My mother thought I stole her retirement. The reality was I had kept her out of a federal obstruction probe. But sitting in the courtroom, watching her play the tragic widow, I realized she did not care about the truth. She only cared about the country club fees she could no longer afford. Sterling walked back to his table and picked up a poster board showing bank transaction records. He placed it on an easel facing the jury. "Your Honor," Sterling said, looking up at the bench, "we have established motive. We have established opportunity. The defendant had sole power of attorney over the trust during the final 2 months of Arthur Hayes' life, and a power she procured while he was on palliative care." Judge David Caldwell looked down from the bench. Caldwell was 62 years old, a former federal prosecutor who had been appointed to the state circuit court 8 years ago. He had a reputation for being impatient with theatrics. He had not interrupted Sterling yet, but his pen was tapping a slow, rhythmic beat against his desk. "Mrs. Hayes," Sterling continued, "did your daughter ever contribute to the household? Did she have a career of her own?" "No," my mother said, letting a sigh escape her lips. "She drifted. We paid her rent. We paid her insurance. Arthur tried to give her busy work at his office just to get her out of the apartment. She simply refused to grow up. I looked at Marcus. He did not object. We were letting her dig the hole as deep as she wanted. The truth was, I had not drifted. For the last 6 years, I had held a top-secret security clearance. The busy work my father gave me involved reconciling classified budgets for the Department of Defense. I did not talk about my job because federal law explicitly prohibited me from talking about my job. My mother took my silence for failure. "No further questions, Your Honor," Sterling said. He buttoned his suit jacket and sat down with a satisfied smirk. He thought he had won. He had painted a perfect picture of a spoiled, parasitic child, robbing her grieving mother. The jury was looking at me with undisguised contempt. The woman in the second row, wearing a floral blouse, was actually glaring. Judge Caldwell shifted his gaze to our table. "Cross-examination, Mr. Vance?" Marcus stood up slowly. He did not carry a notebook, and he did not carry a poster board. He picked up a single manila envelope from the table. It was sealed with red wax and stamped with a federal insignia. "Yes, Your Honor," Marcus said. His voice was calm, conversational. "Just a few questions." He walked to the center of the room. He did not look at my mother right away. He looked at the envelope in his hands. "Mrs. Hayes," Marcus started, "you testified that your husband owned a boutique consulting firm. Is that correct?" "Yes," she said. Her tone was suddenly guarded. "And you testified that he gave your daughter, my client, busy work there, filing, answering phones, that sort of thing?" "That is correct." Marcus nodded. "Mrs. Hayes, did you ever visit your husband's office?" "Occasionally," she said, "for holiday parties, or to drop off his dry cleaning." "So you never actually looked at the contracts his firm handled?" Sterling stood up. "Objection, Your Honor, relevance. The nature of Arthur Hayes's business contracts has nothing to do with the defendant draining his personal trust account." Marcus turned to the judge. "Your Honor, plaintiff's counsel spent 20 minutes establishing the defendant's lack of employment and professional capacity to establish a motive for theft. The exact nature of her employment at that firm goes directly to the heart of her credibility and her access to those funds." Judge Caldwell stopped tapping his pen. He looked at Marcus, then at the envelope. "Overruled, you may answer the question, Mrs. Hayes." My mother frowned. "No, I did not read his contracts. My husband handled the finances. I handled the home." "I see," Marcus said. He held up the manila envelope. "Your Honor, at this time, I would like to approach the bench and submit Defense Exhibit A. I am not entering it into the public record yet, as it contains sensitive information. I am simply asking the court to review it in camera." Sterling scoffed audibly. "Your Honor, this is an ambush. Plaintiff has not been provided with any Exhibit A during discovery." "Because Exhibit A was classified until 9 o'clock this morning," Marcus said quietly. The word classified hung in the air. The courtroom smelled of old floor wax and cheap coffee, but suddenly the atmosphere felt entirely devoid of oxygen. The jury box went still. My mother's perfectly rehearsed expression faltered for the first time. The crumpled tissue in her hand slipped, while falling onto the wooden ledge of the witness stand. Judge Caldwell leaned forward. His eyes narrowed. "Approach." Marcus walked to the bench and handed the sealed envelope to the bailiff, who passed it up to the judge. Caldwell broke the red wax seal. He pulled out a single sheet of heavy, water-marked paper. It bore the official letterhead of the Office of the Inspector General, Department of Defense. I watched Caldwell's eyes scan the text. First paragraph, his expression remained neutral. Second paragraph, his brow furrowed. Third paragraph, his eyes stopped moving. He looked up. His gaze bypassed my mother, bypassed Sterling, and locked directly onto me. He did not look angry. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a live landmine. Judge Caldwell carefully placed the paper face down on his desk, and he folded his hands together. He looked at the bailiff. "Clear the room." The bailiff did not hesitate. He unclipped the heavy brass keyring from his tactical belt and pointed his arm toward the rear of the courtroom. "Gallery, please step outside and move down the corridor immediately," the bailiff instructed, his voice flat and authoritative. "Jury members, leave your notebooks on the chairs and follow the clerk back to the deliberation room. Move quickly, please." The 12 men and women in the jury box exchanged bewildered glances. The woman in the second row wearing the floral blouse, who had been glaring at me with undisguised contempt 2 minutes earlier, now looked lost. They stood up in unison, abandoning their yellow legal pads, and filed out through the narrow side door. The gallery took slightly longer to clear. The confused murmurs grew louder as local reporters and curious onlookers were herded toward the main exit. The massive mahogany doors swung shut with a thick, resounding thud. The bailiff turned the iron deadbolt. The mechanical click echoed loudly across the cavernous, newly emptied space. Only 6 people remained in the room: Judge Caldwell, the court stenographer, my mother, Sterling, Marcus, and me. My mother sat frozen on the elevated witness stand. She still clutched the crumpled tissue in her right hand, but her eyes darted frantically between her high-priced attorney and the bench. Sterling stepped out from behind his polished table. His manufactured theatrical outrage was gone, replaced instantly by the sharp, defensive posture of a corporate lawyer who realized he had just lost control of his own narrative. "Your Honor," Sterling said, attempting to project a confidence he clearly no longer possessed, "I must object to this ex parte communication. Defense counsel is attempting to derail a straightforward civil probate hearing with dramatic theatrics. I demand to see that document." Judge Caldwell did not look at Sterling. He kept his eyes locked on the court stenographer. "Take your hands off the keys, Brenda," Judge Caldwell ordered quietly. "We are off the record. Completely." The stenographer immediately pulled her hands back from the typing machine and folded them securely in her lap. The silence in the room became absolute. It did not feel like a state circuit court anymore. It felt like a secure, subterranean bunker. Judge Caldwell picked up the heavy, watermarked paper. He held it carefully by the edges, treating it with the kind of physical respect usually reserved for live explosives. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Caldwell said, his voice dropping a full octave, "you do not demand anything right now. This letter was hand-delivered to defense counsel precisely at 9 o'clock this morning by a federal courier. It bears the official raised seal of the Department of Defense, Office of the Inspector General. It is physically signed by a deputy director." Sterling stopped walking. He stood exactly halfway between his table and the bench, his leather briefcase forgotten behind him. "The Department of Defense? Your Honor, my client is suing her daughter for the unauthorized withdrawal of $4,200,000 from a private family trust. What does the military have to do with Arthur Hayes?" My mother leaned forward in the wooden witness chair. "Arthur was a private consultant. He advised local logistics companies on supply chain efficiency. He had nothing to do with the military." I looked at my mother. It was the first time I had looked directly at her since the trial began 3 days ago. She was so incredibly certain. She had spent 35 years married to a man she never truly knew. She saw a boring, predictable analyst who came home at 6 o'clock every evening, drank exactly 1 glass of scotch, and read thick historical biographies in his armchair. She never saw the secure, encrypted satellite phone locked inside his iron floor safe. She never saw the redacted threat assessments he analyzed at 2 o'clock in the morning. Marcus spoke without raising his voice. Arthur Hayes was an independent forensic auditor contracted directly by the federal government. For the last 6 years, he operated under a classified security clearance, actively investigating structural embezzlement within sensitive defense contracts. My mother let out a short, breathless laugh. It was a pure reflex, the physical sound of a human mind rejecting an impossible reality. "That is absurd," she said, looking desperately at Sterling for backup. "Tell them that is absurd. He worked in a rented office suite above a local bakery. I bought his desk at a discount furniture outlet." "Mrs. Hayes," Judge Caldwell interrupted. His tone was not cruel, but it was unforgiving. "I am holding a verified federal directive. It explicitly confirms your late husband's security status. It also confirms your daughter's status." Sterling turned slowly and looked at me. The arrogant, practiced smirk he had worn during his opening statement was erased. "Her status?" Marcus walked over to our table and rested his hand lightly on the back of my chair. "My client holds a top-secret clearance. She was not a filing secretary. She was Arthur's lead intelligence analyst. She is currently recognized by the Department of Defense as an active material witness in an ongoing classified federal investigation." My mother gripped the wooden railing of the witness box. Her knuckles turned white against the dark stain of the wood. "She does not even own a house. She drives a 6-year-old used sedan. She is lying." "The letter is not lying," Judge Caldwell said. He placed the document flat on his desk. "The $4,200,000 you are attempting to claw back through this civil lawsuit was never a retirement fund, Mrs. Hayes. It was operational bait." Sterling actually took a physical step backward. His expensive leather shoes scuffed loudly against the polished floor. "Operational bait? Your Honor, I was retained to handle a standard probate dispute. I was not informed of any federal oversight." "You were not informed because you do not possess the required security clearance to know it existed," Marcus replied smoothly. "When Arthur Hayes realized he was dying of pancreatic cancer, he knew the individuals he was investigating would monitor his accounts. They were waiting for him to die so they could manipulate the firm's ledgers and seize the funds he had isolated." I kept my eyes on my mother. When she was staring at me as if I had just taken off a human mask. "He instructed his daughter to drain the primary trust exactly 24 hours after his funeral," Marcus continued, outlining the timeline with precision. "He instructed her to transfer the exact sum of $4,200,000 into a blind holding account in Delaware, removing it from state jurisdiction and placing it directly under federal protection." Sterling looked at his client. He looked at me. He looked back at the judge. The brutal legal math was finally clicking into place inside his head. "If the money is under federal protection," Sterling said, his voice sounding thin, "then this civil court has no jurisdiction to compel its return." "This court has no jurisdiction," Judge Caldwell agreed. He leaned back in his heavy leather chair. "In fact, by filing this lawsuit and demanding public discovery into those specific financial transfers, your client has actively threatened to expose a classified federal operation. You have subpoenaed bank records that the Inspector General spent 6 months burying." My mother shook her head frantically. No, he left that money for me. He promised I would be taken care of. She stole it out of pure spite." Marcus did not argue with her. He simply reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a second, smaller, sealed envelope. "My client did not steal anything," Marcus said, placing the new envelope squarely on the defense table. "She executed a direct order from a federal contractor, which was authorized by the Inspector General. The money is sitting exactly where it belongs. The problem, Your Honor, is not what my client did." Marcus looked directly at my mother, his eyes locking onto her pale, terrified face. "The problem," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a freezing whisper, "is what Mrs. Hayes did with the secondary account." Sterling froze. He turned his head slowly, looking at the woman sitting in the witness stand. The polished corporate defender who had walked into the courtroom radiating superiority now looked like a man who had stepped onto thin ice and heard a distinct, sharp crack. "Secondary account," Sterling repeated. He did not phrase it as a question to Marcus. He directed it entirely at his client. "Margaret, what secondary account?" My mother did not answer him. The crumpled tissue slipped from her fingers, drifting down to the polished hardwood floor. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. and the expensive black cashmere sweater suddenly looked suffocating against her pale skin. "Mr. Vance," Judge Caldwell said. He placed his hands flat on his desk. "Explain the second envelope." Marcus picked up the smaller manila envelope. He did not break the seal immediately. He held it by the corner, letting the silence in the room stretch. "Arthur Hayes was a meticulous man, Your Honor," Marcus said. "He knew his wife. He knew she possessed expensive tastes and expected a certain standard of living. He did not leave her destitute. The $4,200,000 was operational bait, but Arthur also maintained a legitimate, fully taxed marital asset portfolio." Marcus walked toward the center aisle, stopping exactly halfway between the defense table and the witness stand. Exactly 3 weeks before he passed away, Arthur transferred $850,000 into a standard domestic savings account. He filed the necessary tax disclosures. He named his wife as the sole beneficiary. It was clean money. It was her permanent pension. Sterling looked at my mother. His posture was rigid. "You told me you were penniless. You signed a sworn affidavit stating your daughter left you with nothing but the house and a leased vehicle." My mother swallowed hard. Her voice lost its practiced fragile tremor. It sounded thin and reedy. It was an investment. I was securing my future. I watched her. I remembered the day after the funeral. The partners from my father's firm had come to the house. 3 men in custom suits carrying platters of catered food and bottles of imported wine. They offered their condolences. They sat in our living room, and they told my mother they wanted to take care of Arthur's widow. "Securing your future," Marcus echoed. He broke the wax seal on the second envelope. He pulled out a thick stack of bank wire receipts. "Your Honor, exactly 14 days after Arthur Hayes was buried, the defendant was approached by 2 senior partners from his consulting firm." Judge Caldwell leaned forward. "The same firm currently under federal investigation for defense contract embezzlement?" "The exact same firm," Marcus confirmed. "Those partners were panicked. They knew Arthur had isolated the $4 million, but they did not know where it was. They needed access to Arthur's private ledgers. They needed to know what he had found before the federal auditors arrived." Marcus walked to the witness stand. He placed the wire receipts on the wooden ledge, right next to where my mother's hands rested. "They offered Mrs. Hayes a proprietary investment opportunity," Marcus said. "Guaranteed returns. A private equity fund reserved exclusively for internal partners. All she had to do was roll over the $850,000 from her husband's pension account into their corporate holdings, and in exchange, she granted them unrestricted administrative access to Arthur's home office, his hard drives, and his personal filing cabinets." The color completely drained from Sterling's face. He stepped backward. He took 2 deliberate steps away from his own client. "Margaret," Sterling said. His voice was hollow. "Did you let those men into the house?" She looked at him, her eyes wide. They were his friends. They were his partners. They said Arthur had left loose ends at the office. They said the investment would double my principal in 36 months. I had to protect myself. My daughter had just stolen my retirement. "She didn't steal it," Sterling snapped. His professional composure shattered. "She sequestered it under federal orders. You invited the primary targets of a Department of Defense investigation into a secure location and handed them the keys." Judge Caldwell picked up his reading glasses. He did not put them on. He tapped the earpiece against the wood. "Mr. Vance, what did those partners find in that home office?" "Nothing of value to them, Your Honor," Marcus said. "My client had already swept the office. She removed the encrypted hardware and the physical ledgers 48 hours before the partners arrived. But they did not leave empty-handed." Marcus turned to face the bench. "They found the routing numbers for the blind account in Delaware," Marcus said. "My client left them there intentionally. It was the trap Arthur designed." I looked at the floor. The memory of that night was stark. sitting in the dark on the carpet of his office, copying a fake routing number onto a piece of scratch paper, shoving it under a stack of utility bills on his desk, leaving the breadcrumbs exactly where the firm's partners would look. "The trap," Judge Caldwell repeated. "Explain." "If the partners simply destroyed records, the federal government could only charge them with obstruction," Marcus explained. "Arthur wanted them for the primary theft. He needed them to actively attempt to seize the stolen government funds." Marcus tapped the wire receipts sitting on the witness stand. "The partners took the routing numbers from the home office," Marcus said. 4 days later, they initiated a massive wire transfer, attempting to pull the $4,200,000 out of the Delaware account and route it into an offshore holding company in the Cayman Islands. Sterling closed his eyes. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. The man charged $800 an hour, and he was currently calculating how fast he could run out of the courtroom. "The Delaware account was monitored by the Inspector General," Marcus continued. "The moment the partners initiated the wire transfer, they triggered a federal trap. The Department of Defense traced the digital handshake directly back to the firm's primary servers. They secured the warrants. They raided the firm at 6 o'clock this morning." My mother stopped breathing. She sat perfectly still. 6 o'clock this morning," Sterling whispered. "Yes," Marcus said. "The 2 senior partners were arrested by federal agents in their homes. The firm's assets are currently frozen." Judge Caldwell looked at the wire receipts on the ledge, and Mrs. Hayes's investment. "The $850,000, Marcus said. His voice was flat. "She wired it directly into the firm's primary operating account, the same account the federal government seized exactly 3 hours ago under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act." The silence in the room returned. It was absolute. My mother did not have $4 million. She did not have $850,000. She had nothing. "It is gone?" she asked, and the words barely scraped past her throat. "My money, the pension, it is gone?" "It is currently classified as the proceeds of a criminal enterprise, Mrs. Hayes," Marcus said. "You willingly surrendered it to the primary targets of a federal investigation." She turned her head slowly and looked at me. The arrogant, grieving widow routine was dead. Only pure panic remained. "You knew," she said, her voice cracked. "You let me do it. You let me give them the money." "I did not let you do anything," I said. It was the first time I had spoken since the trial began. My voice echoed in the empty courtroom. "I told you to wait. I told you the estate was complicated. I told you not to sign anything with his partners until the probate cleared." "You set me up!" she screamed. She gripped the wooden railing and leaned forward, where the tendons in her neck stood out against her pale skin. "Order," Judge Caldwell said. He did not yell. He did not hit his gavel. He simply spoke the word, and the weight of his office forced her back into the chair. Sterling stepped completely away from the plaintiff's table. He walked toward the center aisle, distancing himself physically and legally from the witness stand. "Your Honor," Sterling said, "I must formally request an immediate recess. Furthermore, I must petition the court for an emergency withdrawal as counsel of record for the plaintiff." My mother's head snapped toward him. "Sterling, what are you doing?" "I cannot represent you, Margaret," Sterling said coldly. "You committed perjury. You signed a sworn affidavit claiming destitution while hiding an $850,000 asset transfer. You knowingly concealed material facts regarding your interactions with the subjects of a federal raid. I paid you a retainer," she yelled. "You work for me." "Your retainer was $75,000, Sterling snapped back. He looked at the judge. "Your Honor, I must respectfully inquire if the federal seizure of the firm's assets extends to funds wired by my client to my law office." Marcus picked up the manila envelope. "The Department of Defense tracks all tertiary transfers associated with the primary targets," Marcus said. If Mrs. Hayes paid her legal retainer using funds derived from the partner's guaranteed returns from that fraudulent investment— Marcus let the sentence hang in the air. Sterling looked sick. The polished, expensive lawyer realized he had just worked for 3 months for absolutely nothing, and he was currently holding radioactive money. "Your Honor," Sterling said, his voice tight, "I am withdrawing. Immediately." Judge Caldwell did not blink. He looked down at the polished mahogany desk. "Your motion to withdraw is granted, Mr. Sterling," Judge Caldwell said. "However, you are not excused from the premises. You will remain in the corridor outside these doors until the federal agents currently waiting in the clerk's office review your retainer agreement." Sterling's hand hovered over the brass latch of his briefcase. "Federal agents," Sterling repeated. "2 special agents from the Department of Defense," Caldwell confirmed. "They arrived 20 minutes ago to interview anyone connected to the secondary transfers. You may wait outside." Sterling closed his briefcase. The latch clicked. He turned and walked down the center aisle and pushed through the double doors. The deadbolt engaged again. My mother was alone on the witness stand. She looked at the empty space where her attorney had been standing. "Your Honor," she said. Her voice shook. It was the sound of actual fear. "I am a victim. Those men lied to me. I did not know they were stealing from the government." "Mrs. Hayes," Marcus said, "did you read the prospectus before you wired the $850,000? She turned her head toward him. "I trusted them. They were Arthur's partners." "They gave you a 60-page non-disclosure agreement," Marcus said. He pulled a bound document from his briefcase and placed it on the table. "It's a document you signed and notarized 3 days before you filed this civil lawsuit against your daughter." My mother stared at the bound paper. "That is a standard confidentiality clause," she said. "It required more than discretion," Marcus said. He opened the document. Page 58, Section 4. It explicitly required you to initiate public litigation against your daughter to contest the transfer of the $4 million. It required you to file sworn affidavits claiming she acted without authorization. Judge Caldwell leaned forward. "Let me see that document, Mr. Vance." Marcus carried the bound paper to the bench. "The partners did not just want Arthur's hard drives," Marcus explained. "They needed the $4 million returned to a vulnerable jurisdiction. As long as the money sat in the Delaware blind account, or they could not touch it without triggering federal alarms. But if a state court ordered the funds returned to the primary estate due to a fraudulent transfer, then the money moves back into a local account," Judge Caldwell finished. "An account the partners still had administrative access to." "Exactly," Marcus said. "They funded her legal retainer. They provided Mr. Sterling. They orchestrated this entire civil trial to use this court as a laundering mechanism." I looked at my mother. She sat with her hands folded in her lap. The cashmere sweater absorbed the cold light of the courtroom. "I just wanted what was mine," she whispered. "You wanted what you felt you deserved," I said. She looked at me. "I was his wife for 35 years. He left me $850,000, and he trusted you with $4 million. It was a betrayal." "It was a quarantine," I said. "He knew you measured loyalty in dollars. He knew the partners would offer you money, and he knew you would take it. He did not leave the $4 million with me because he loved me more. He left it with me because he knew I would not sell it." My mother flinched. The words hit her. "He used me," she said. "He protected you," I corrected her. "If he had given you the $4 million, the partners would have found a way to take that too. You would be sitting in an interrogation room right now facing an indictment for conspiracy to defraud the United States government." She shook her head. "I am facing that anyway. You heard the judge. The agents are outside." Marcus picked up the first manila envelope. "No, Mrs. Hayes," Marcus said. "You are not." Judge Caldwell looked up from the non-disclosure agreement. "Explain, counselor." Arthur Hayes negotiated a precise contingency plan with the Inspector General before his death, Marcus said. He provided the government with the internal ledgers proving the partners orchestrated the embezzlement. He secured the $4 million as evidence. In exchange, the Department of Defense agreed to a specific immunity parameter. Marcus pointed to the heavy, watermarked paper sitting on the judge's desk. Paragraph 4 of the federal directive, Marcus said. The government recognizes Margaret Hayes as an unwitting participant. She is classified as a manipulated asset, not a co-conspirator. The agents outside are not here to arrest her. They are here to debrief her. My mother let out a sharp, ragged breath, and her shoulders slumped. I am not going to prison, she whispered. No, Judge Caldwell said. He closed the bound non-disclosure agreement. You are not going to a federal penitentiary, but you are going to leave this courtroom with exactly what you brought into it. My mother looked up. My pension, the $850,000, can I get it back? That money was wired into a criminal enterprise, Judge Caldwell said. It is currently frozen under a federal asset forfeiture order. It will remain frozen for years as the criminal trials proceed. If the government determines those funds were commingled with stolen defense budgets, they will be permanently seized. She stared at the bench. The reality of her situation settled over her. She had no lawyer, she had no pension, and she had a house she could not afford and a leased car she could not pay for. She had tried to destroy my life to preserve her status. She had ended up destroying her own. Judge Caldwell picked up his wooden gavel. This civil lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice, Judge Caldwell announced. The plaintiff cannot refile. The defendant is released from all liability regarding the Delaware account transfers. He struck the sounding block once. The sharp crack echoed through the empty room. Court is adjourned, he said. The court stenographer closed her machine, picked up her bag, and walked out without looking at either of us. The bailiff stepped forward. He walked to the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the courtroom and turned the iron deadbolt. He pulled the doors open. Standing in the corridor were two men in dark suits. They wore identical lanyards around their necks, federal credentials. One of the agents stepped into the doorway. He looked at the witness stand. Margaret Hayes, the agent said. His voice was polite, efficient, and entirely devoid of warmth. Please come with us. My mother did not argue. She did not scream or throw herself against the wooden railing. The fight had drained from her bones. She stood up from the witness chair, her knees locked for a fraction of a second, struggling against her own weight. She smoothed the front of her black cashmere sweater, a useless mechanical gesture to preserve a dignity she had already signed away for an empty promise of guaranteed returns. She stepped down to the polished floor. She did not look at me. She kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, walking down the center aisle. Her heels clicked a slow, steady, hollow rhythm against the hardwood. The two federal agents parted just enough to let her pass. They did not touch her. They simply fell into step right behind her, their dark suits forming a rigid, inescapable shadow. The mahogany doors closed, shutting out the fluorescent light of the corridor. The courtroom was quiet. The hum of the air conditioning vents seemed loud in the empty space. Judge Caldwell took off his reading glasses. He folded the earpieces and placed the frames meticulously on his desk. He looked at Marcus, then shifted his gaze to me. Your father was a complicated man, Judge Caldwell said. He turned his own death into a federal sting operation. He was an analyst, Your Honor, I replied. He analyzed risk. He knew his partners would try to bury his findings the moment his heart stopped. He knew his wife would take their money to maintain her lifestyle. He planned for the variables. And the $4,200,000? Judge Caldwell asked. The money currently sitting in Delaware? Marcus packed his legal pad into his leather briefcase. It remains in the blind trust. The Inspector General has authorized my client to maintain executive control of the account until the criminal trials conclude. Once the partners are convicted and sentenced, the funds will be formally absorbed into the Department of Defense restitution program. My client does not keep a single cent. She never intended to. Judge Caldwell nodded. He stood up, smoothing the dark fabric of his robe. You navigated a very narrow path today. You protected a classified investigation while sitting through a public execution of your own character. I hope you find a quieter line of work. He turned and walked through the private door behind the bench. I stood up. I pushed my chair under the defense table. Marcus handed me my wool coat. We walked out of the courtroom together. We did not speak in the elevator. We walked through the crowded lobby of the courthouse, pushed through the heavy glass doors, and stepped out into the cold, sharp Virginia air. 18 months later, I sat at a gray metal desk inside a secure facility in Arlington. I no longer drove a 6-year-old sedan. I drove a reliable, unremarkable 4-door compact car. I still lived in a modest apartment with beige walls and cheap blinds. I still made a quiet, unnoticeable salary on paper. My title had changed from administrative assistant to senior intelligence analyst. I drank black coffee from a chipped ceramic mug and read redacted threat assessments on a secure monitor. My father's boutique consulting firm no longer existed. The federal government had seized the brick building, the internal servers, and every corporate bank account connected to the partners. The 2 senior partners pled guilty to conspiracy, corporate embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. They accepted a binding plea deal to avoid a public federal trial. They received 20 years in a minimum security penitentiary. My mother did not go to prison. The Department of Defense kept its word. She was classified as a manipulated asset. She endured 3 days of grueling, repetitive interviews in a windowless room with 2 agents, where she handed over every email, every bank statement, and every contract the partners had given her. She surrendered the deed to the 4-bedroom house in Alexandria to pay her remaining legal fees and satisfy her outstanding property taxes. The $850,000 she had wired to the partners was permanently seized by the federal government under asset forfeiture laws. It was gone forever. She now lives in a 1-bedroom apartment on the industrial outskirts of Richmond. She works 4 days a week as a receptionist at a local dental clinic. She answers phones, schedules routine cleanings, and files insurance claims. She does not wear cashmere. She does not attend country club luncheons. She spends her evenings watching television in a cramped living room decorated with cheap furniture she bought at a discount outlet, which she sent me exactly 1 text message the day she moved out of the Alexandria house. It read, "You could have warned me." I deleted the message. I did not reply. She still did not understand. If I had warned her, she would have warned them. She would have leveraged the classified information to negotiate a better payout for herself. She would have compromised a multi-million-dollar federal investigation just to keep her social calendar intact. My father knew exactly who she was. He built a cage she walked into willingly just by being herself. I finished my coffee. I turned back to the secure monitor, opened a new encrypted file, and started tracing a new set of offshore accounts. The work never ended. The money always left a trail. I was just following the numbers exactly the way my father taught me. And if your own mother dragged you into a public courtroom, accused you of robbing your dead father, and tried to ruin your life just to protect her illicit payout, would you have warned her about the federal trap? Or would you have sat in silence and let her destroy her own future? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.